Hello and welcome to a very special Q&A video. What makes this Q&A special, UA? It is the first Q&A video I've ever done after like 7.5 years and many videos. I have done Q&A live streams, to be fair, but I thought this would be fun because it's a chance to think about the answers a little more than just doing it like in the moment, which is also fun too. So I really appreciate everyone who submitted questions. I was definitely a little bit worried that maybe there wouldn't be enough. I just did everything through a YouTube community post. It worked out great, and I took 10 questions to answer here, and I'll be using a different microphone for every question because this could be a simple video, but I'll make it a complicated video. Complicated. The microphone I'm using right now is the Rode PodMic USB. Everything's running into the Rodecaster Pro 2, but unlike reviews and things, I do have EQ and processing turned on. So I'll be processing each of these mics how I actually use them when I'm using them for streams and podcasts and stuff like that. When I do reviews, I never do any processing because then it messes up the sound. That's probably more information than you needed to know. But speaking of information that you do need to know, let's jump into the first question. Actually, let me switch my mic and then jump into the first question. This is the Earthworks Ethos, and the first question comes from Thomas J. Durfee. Thomas, that is a great first name. What are some of the lessons you learned about audio from teaching at high school? If you ever went back, what kits would you bring? So this is a great question to start with. If you didn't know, I was a high school digital media teacher for 11 years, and that was super fun, and it was really cool to teach students all about audio and video production. And the biggest thing that I always emphasize in my classes when it came to audio, especially when working in video, is that audio is half of a video. It's easy to sort of focus more on the cameras and the lenses and the lighting and all those really important things. But if something doesn't sound good or isn't pleasant to listen to, that's almost worse than having it be a little bit grainy or blurry or something like that. So audio is hugely important. And the thing that I noticed was as soon as students noticed and could pick out bad audio, then they couldn't ever unnotice it. And sometimes at the end of I'd have the same students for several years in a row. And at the end, some of them would be like, you ruin movies for me and you ruin TV shows because they can only pick apart things and be super, overanalyzing of everything. And I was like, good. That's exactly how I want it to be. I want you to think about these things. So as soon as I could get a student paying attention to audio, that was half the battle. And a good way to do that was not just pointing out bad audio, but helping them get good audio. So the thing that I always started with were Zoom H1s. I use the H1. This is the H1 Essential. I use the H1Ns. And even my 9th grade students could just take those. And as soon as they started using these little cheap recorders to record their voices instead of the built-in camera or phone mics, it leveled things up. And once they heard those results, then they were hooked on wanting to get better and better. And then we could move into, using mics as booms. We could get into broadcast studio microphones. We could bring in mixers and Rodecasters and do all that kind of stuff. But to start, I would always just use little recorders like these. And I don't really think that would change if I went back to teaching. I guess, I would still use H1s, but now Zoom has the Essential line, which I would use because then it's even harder for students to clip audio and all that kind of stuff. And the easier you can make it for someone to get good audio when they're starting, the better, because then they don't get discouraged, especially if they're just learning everything. A thing that's not necessarily audio related that I absolutely would bring if I went back, which didn't really exist at the time, is YOLObox Ultra, because we did stream a lot of events, games, rallies, graduations, all that kind of stuff. And setting up mobile live streaming, as I've talked about in some videos, is really tricky. Especially if you're you literally need to bring out a computer and an audio mixer and you need to run cable and do all this crazy stuff. If I could just take something like this Hollyland wireless unit, connect these to cameras, run them into the YOLObox Ultra, and this is the whole thing that controls the stream, and I can bring HDMI audio from each of the cameras if I need to, and then I can also connect either a Rodecaster or other, audio inputs here. Not as ideal as something like the Rodecaster Video, but for being a comprehensive event unit, especially with built-in scoreboards and stuff for games, the YOLObox Ultra, this literally would have been a game changer if it had been around while I was teaching. And this is the thing that I would recommend, even though it's not 100% audio related. Kind of getting off topic. Thank you for the question. Let's go to the next one. So my next microphone is going to be the Rode Interview Pro, which every time I use this microphone, I love it more and more because there's no handling noise and it sounds great. And the pickup pattern makes it really easy to cover up bad mic technique, like moving the microphone all around, and it doesn't really matter. Really, really like this microphone, especially that I can just go wirelessly directly into the Rodecaster, or if I want, I could even record 32-bit float audio internally. So question number 2 comes from a channel that I'm actually a huge fan of, Scott Kramer. If you've never watched Scott's videos, they are extremely enjoyable. Doesn't matter what the topic is, you can trust it to be super fun and just like, it's just charming and fun and enjoyable. And he's kind of a covert mic nerd because every video has like multiple different microphones, even though it's not part of the audio video niche. So that was actually, it was kind of him that was the inspiration of me switching microphones for this, because he switches microphones so much whenever he does different segments in his videos. And he says sometimes people don't notice. I notice, and I appreciate it. So Scott's question is, actually, this is a really great question. Is there a microphone that you think sounds amazing, but never actually feel like using? I've got an SM7B that I hardly ever touch because it's not as fun as some of my other mics, even if it sounds better. This is a really great question because it ties into something that I talk about a lot, which is how enjoyable something is to use. I think makes a huge difference. Sometimes people think like it's just the tech specs, whatever this microphone, this is the best microphone based on the tech specs, or I spent a bunch of money on a microphone, so that means it's the best. It has to be something you enjoy using. It doesn't matter if it's like a $25 microphone from Amazon or thousands of dollars on, a boutique, beautiful microphone. If you don't enjoy it, then the rest kind of doesn't matter. And I definitely have that microphone. Actually, I don't have that microphone because I got rid of it because I never used it. And that is probably going to make some people mad because it's the Electro Voice RE20. So for Scott, it was the SM7B. The RE20, kind of not a sister or sibling microphone to the SM7B, but they're kind of competitors, right? A lot of people choose one or the other. And the SM7B, for me, I actually didn't get one of these for a long time, kind of for the same reason. I was like, there's more exciting, more interesting microphones out there. And then when I got mine, it wasn't until 2021 that I actually had an SM7B of my own. And as soon as I had my own, I did kind of fall in love with it, especially once you EQ it. And then you do weird things like this, which I'll be using later. So that is a really fun microphone to me. The RE20 was just such a pain to me. I like the way that it sounds. Obviously, it's a good sounding microphone. I didn't love it on my voice, but it was just like, it's so susceptible to handling noise. It needs like this big shock mount if you're not using just the tiny little regular mount, which then makes it, prone to handling noise. And I just like never used it. I appreciated it. Like the microphone's legacy and the impact that it's had on everything, I really, really appreciated and love. And I know it's a great microphone, and I totally understand why people love all those Electro Voice RE series microphones. I know that they're great. It was one that like, it was just on my wall there and I never used it. And I knew it was such a good microphone that I had to give it to someone who I knew was going to actually use it and appreciate it, because microphones should be used and appreciated. So for me, it's the Electro Voice RE20. And I just mentioned it, but now I am on the wireless SM7B. So this is the Shure SM7B through the Sennheiser EWDP wireless system going into the Rodecaster Pro 2. If you want to know why or how or about this, I do have a whole separate video on that. And it's really, really fun. This is not supposed to be a handheld microphone, but it's one of my favorite handheld microphones because it's fun. And I think it sounds great. And there's also no handling noise either, kind of like the Interview Pro. So next question comes from another character, another question from another character. What is really the difference between XLR mics and USB mics? I want like an answer for dummies, like it must be a bigger difference than the cable. This is a really great question, and I think the answer has changed over time because USB microphones have gotten so good. So the long and short of it is that a USB microphone is its own audio interface, and an XLR microphone needs an interface. Or a mixer. That's kind of a way you can think of it. So USB tends to be a little bit simpler in general. XLR tends to be a little more complicated, again, speaking very generally. Now, more advanced USB microphones can have all kinds of features and gizmos and lights and cool stuff on them, which is really, really fun. And it can add a level of complexity, so they're not always just ultra simple. But in general, you just kind of plug it into your computer, plug it into a device, and you're good to go. You don't need to worry about boosters or mixers or other interfaces or anything like that. One of the biggest benefits to XLR microphones, on the other hand, is just the sheer variety. So I don't know the actual numbers, but if you say something like there's hundreds of USB microphones available, there's thousands and thousands of XLR microphones available. So you can really dial in exactly what you want, what works on your voice, the style you want. Like, you can get so specific with different XLR microphones across every budget. Since they're not tied to any USB system or a computer or a software or firmware, they do tend to be a bit longer lasting. Not that USB microphones won't last a good 5, 10, or even more years, but we just talked about the SM7B. This is from the 1970s. The RE20 that I mentioned in the last question was released in the 1960s. And if you had one of those original ones, they're still great. Microphones are one of those really unique technology areas where just because something is older doesn't mean that it's out of date. And in some cases, older things can actually even be better or at least as good as the modern things. So that's kind of one of the bits of magic of XLR. You also typically will have a much easier time using more than one microphone with XLR than USB. In recent years, companies like Rode, and I think Shure's even done a little bit, companies have come out with software that makes it a little bit easier to add multiple USB microphones to a computer, but even that gets a little bit tricky. And if you just try to plug in two, not of the same brand USB microphones to a computer or something, you're just not really going to be able to record at the same time. So if you're doing a podcast with you and a guest or two co-hosts or whatever, it's really, really tricky if you're both trying to use USB mics into the same computer most of the time. XLR microphones, once you have your mixer, you have your interface, it is super easy. You can just add in microphones and there's no problem, no delay, no lag, nothing like that. But where I think this answer really does change is when it comes to sound quality, because when USB microphones were a newer thing, there's always been great mics out there, like the Audio-Technica AT2020 comes to mind as still a really good USB microphone that I think came out in 2006 or 7, something like that. Still awesome sounding. But I think now, if you buy a USB microphone, no one should be able to tell that it's a USB microphone just by the way that it sounds. It should be the same, is it dynamic? Is it condenser? It has different sound qualities, but it shouldn't be that's definitely USB, not XLR. Sound quality wise, there really shouldn't be a difference. So I think that's pretty cool. It opens up a lot of accessibility to different people, and asking the difference between them is a question that I think is a great question that makes a lot of sense to be curious about. This is the Lewitt LCT 440 Pure, and before we jump to the next question, this is a good example of that XLR versus USB sound quality, because I know a lot of people are big fans of the Elgato Wave series microphones, and from what I understand, Lewitt makes the capsules inside those microphones, and I've always been a huge fan of the way Lewitt microphones sound, all of them, regardless of the capsule size or whatever. I just think they're awesome sounding microphones. And you have those same capsules in the Elgato USB microphones, so they sound just as awesome. So anyway, I thought that was maybe a little bit of evidence that sound quality wise, there should be no difference between USB and XLR. But our next question gets into a potentially touchy subject from J. Rennick EMD. Everybody is talking about AI right now, but most things are just overhyped. I really value your straightforward and practical approach to things, so I wanted to know if you use AI at all in your content creation process, and if so, how? So before answering this, just disclaimer reminder, this is all my own opinion, because I know this is a pretty hot button issue, and I don't know if I have the intelligence myself to fully dissect the artificial intelligence debate. Something that my wife Heather and I do talk about a lot is how this kind of fits, and the fact that the AI genie is not going back in the bottle. That toothpaste is not going back in the tube. When technology is new and it's early on, it kind of feels easy to dig your heels in the ground and say, no, I'm not interested in that. I don't like that. That's bad. I'm shutting the door on it. But as time goes on, you could find yourself getting a little bit left behind, or even a lot of bit left behind, because it's just going to keep progressing. So wherever these things end up, I don't know where that's going to be. They're not going away. And so, especially if your job is to be a content creator, whether that's full-time, part-time, or just something you're interested in, adapting is really key to keeping that going. If you just do the one thing forever, it's hard to have a long-term sustained career. So understanding these new, potentially game-changing, landscape shifting tools like AI is really important. And even if that means you try them out, you understand them, and you don't like them, at least you know why, because you tried it for yourself. And I think that's hugely important. So I do use some AI tools in my workflow, and they have made my life a lot easier, which is what I think they're supposed to do. I know that there are AI tools out there that do terrible things and make things worse for other people. And that's awful too. But I kind of look at it like any tool. If you have a hammer, your hammer can be used to destroy, but it can also be used to build things. And it's all up to the person using it. But hammers aren't going to go away just because some people use them for bad things. So personally, when I'm using AI, what I try to do is have it enhance my workflow, not generate ideas or anything like that. I want everything that I make to be my ideas, because this channel, even though it is my job, is also a creative outlet, and I want it to be, handmade, I guess, human made, I guess you could say. So where AI fits a lot, a big place that pops to mind right away is thumbnail making, because Photoshop, as much as I just cannot stand Adobe's for a lot of reasons, Photoshop's generative AI fill and stuff is pretty awesome. And it's not that I couldn't do these things without it, but a lot of it, especially when it comes to just sort of like cleaning up images that I'm trying to use for a thumbnail or fixing a background to something or whatever, things that used to take me, 45 minutes to do by hand now take 8 seconds via AI. And so that is such a game changer when it comes to my workflow. I'm not trying to create an art piece that's going to go in a gallery and all this kind of stuff. Like, I wouldn't use an AI tool for that. I would want to do it, 100% by hand. But for a thumbnail, when I just need to do something like, here's an example. This is a photo I took. This was the first time I ever actually used the generative fill. This was a photo I took for a thumbnail. It's a boom arm and a microphone in front of the blue backdrop that I have here. I just really liked the lighting in this moment. I took a photo and I thought, oh, this would be a great thumbnail. But you can see the sides off of the blue there. And I wanted to just, make it a solid blue background, which is something I can do. I can extend and clone and all the things, that background, to make it fill the whole screen. But I use generative AI, and literally in, 8 seconds or whatever, it gave me this, which was a perfect result, and then made it super easy to use the rest for a thumbnail. And so, in here physically, I don't have a huge space. I'm looking over here where my backdrop wall is. It's pretty narrow. So when I take photos there for thumbnails, a lot of times the whole room is involved, but now I can just easily fill up the whole background and make things really bold and bright and clean looking, and it's way easier than it was before. I also use AI for captions. I was using Descript a lot, where you can just drop your video in there and it captions it, and it does a pretty darn good job overall, especially with things like product names and brand names and wordplay and all that goofy stuff. Descript usually does a good job, so I'm kind of bouncing back and forth. I would like to save the monthly payment and not have to pay for Descript anymore and just use Final Cut, but I don't know that Final Cut's 100% there yet. So that is a great use of AI. I used to either caption every video myself, which took hours, or I would pay to have each video individually captioned, where you send it to a service and they just run it through some AI thing. And then it's like 25 cents a minute or something like that per video. So, and it takes a long time to do. So that is another case where it has really streamlined my workflow. I do use AI sometimes to check video concepts, but not to develop video concepts. So what I mean by that is, if I'm doing a video like how to start podcasting, and I want to list out the steps to like creating a podcast, I'm going to put that together myself, because I want it to be the way I would explain to someone how to podcast, not how an AI would explain to someone. But when you have a topic like that that's kind of big and confusing and there's so many steps to it, I might not be 100% confident that I'm explaining it the best way possible. So then if I go to an AI and I ask, like, how would you explain, how to start a podcast to someone in 5 steps? And I see the order that it puts those steps in, and it kind of seems like the same order I'm going in, that makes me feel better, because I feel like the AI is trying to be as general and, wide-reaching as possible with that answer. And that means that mine is probably going to make sense to the widest number of people too. So there's things like that that help. I also use it for basic research a lot, which is just things like, if I really want to know specific differences, like what's the difference between, this specific wireless system and that specific wireless system, it can give me a breakdown pretty easily, so I can compare ranges and specs. And if something seems a little weird, I can always then go double check it and fact check it. But other stuff too, like if you want to know when a microphone was released or when this version of something came out, it's usually a better than Google way to find answers to those questions, if you're still being aware that it's not always right. And if something doesn't sound right, you can double check it, or, kind of use it as like like a backup source, not a primary source, I guess. So those are most of the ways that I use AI pretty regularly, but again, none of those have to do with actually creating anything. Like my videos are not edited by AI, the concepts are not made by AI, these questions are not submitted by AI, which is why they also have a lot of mistakes and things in them and those imperfections, but it's really important to me that the channel has a human-made touch to it, like a hand-stamped human-made thing, and AI can supplement the workflow, streamline things behind the scenes, but it shouldn't be, at least for me, it shouldn't be what's creating what you're seeing and experiencing and spending your time with, because I want to spend my time making something that's hopefully useful, maybe slightly entertaining, that then you can spend your time hopefully getting some kind of benefit from as well. So for the next question, I have gone to the tiny microphone, which has an MSRP of less than $10. So it's pretty awesome. And I also need to give a huge shout out to Bronson from Audio Hotline, because he's the one that gave me this microphone. And I think it does everything that it should do and probably a little bit more. So let's jump into our next question, which is actually kind of related to the last one. So I wanted to put these two together. This is It's R7 Studio asks, my M1 Mac Mini does great with photo editing, but the new Mac Mini seems tempting, if only because it will be compatible with future AI updates. What are your thoughts on whether to upgrade soonish or wait until Apple releases substantial AI updates to determine whether the upgrade makes sense? Also, how do you avoid feeding the gas bug? Those are both great questions. Maybe that's a two-parter question. And I'm actually really glad that you did ask this question, because I was going to make a video recently when all the new M4 Macs came out titled, You Probably Don't Need a New Computer, but I didn't want to make anyone feel bad if they did just want or need a new computer, so I decided not to make that. But the gas bug, let's start there, I guess. Like this is my main computer that I make all my videos on. It's my M1 Max MacBook Pro that I got in 2021, October of 2021, and it's still going super strong. There's faster computers out there. I'm sure I would notice a bit of a difference, but probably not. There's nothing that's going to be groundbreaking, even though this is still the M1 and now there's the M4s out there. So realistically, is there something that is genuinely going to be improved by upgrading? But at the same time, I don't want to make anyone feel bad if they just want to. If that's your thing, right? I'm a person who has like way more microphones than any individual should. I don't need all these microphones, but it's fun. So if you're somebody who just likes staying on top of things, you like getting new computers when they're released, you like getting a new phone, and you can figure it out financially in a way that's not dangerous or destructive, you should do that, and you should have a ton of fun doing that, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But something I always watch out for with the gas bug, the gear acquisition syndrome bug, is, and that goes with anything, guitars, cameras, audio gear, computers, whatever, is, does the idea come from yourself? Are you the one that actually thinks, I kind of do want something new, even if it's just for fun, even if it's not 100% necessary? Are you the one kind of leading that thought? Or are you just seeing a bunch of videos of everyone going like new M4, and now you're like, yeah, my computer that works totally fine is definitely not good enough anymore. So as long as you're the one leading the charge to upgrade and have gas, then I think it's okay. If other people are putting the idea in your head, then that's something that I try to watch out for and not give into. And that goes into then the question about Apple Intelligence, because you're saying that your M1 works great, you do a lot of photo editing, but the future AI compatibility and stuff, right now, Apple Intelligence is so new. It's currently not even out on a lot of devices. So it's definitely not something that I would say is an upgrade worthy feature, because it's barely in existence at all publicly. Also, Apple did a really cool thing. The M series chips are awesome. Back here, this computer is still my base model original M1 Mac Mini. The M4 Mac Mini is insanely powerful. It's probably, this was a $4,000 computer when I bought it, because I spec'd it up a little bit. And the M4 base model Mac Mini is probably not that different in terms of performance from this, if not even better in some cases, and it's like $600. So there's some really cool advantages there. But my M1 back here is still going really, really strong. It might not be the best for tons of multi-layer 4K editing, or if I need to like stream in 4K and edit in 4K and do a video call and, like really, really high level, especially high resolution stuff, gaming on multiple monitors while doing all that kind of thing. It might not be the best computer for that. But for the $600 I spent on it like 4 years ago, it's a pretty amazing computer. And the M series architecture is currently compatible with Apple Intelligence. So all the new AI stuff, all the new Final Cut Pro AI features and stuff, I can get on my M1 Max more than 3-year-old computer right here. So I definitely don't think Apple Intelligence is a reason to upgrade now, because all those features, as far as I can tell, are still available on the older computers. So you're not getting any benefit by upgrading. Maybe they're a little faster, I guess. In the future, that'll change as Apple Intelligence continues to develop and become more intelligent, and the computers continue to evolve, and there is more of a difference between the new ones and the old ones. Then I think it could be more worth considering an update. But for now, I definitely don't think Apple Intelligence is a reason to update currently. That's just my opinion. But again, if you just want to update and you're the one leading that charge, go for it and enjoy your new gear. And now I'm on the Rode Broadcaster using the Broadcaster preset in the Rodecaster Pro, all different products. And earlier when I said I gave my RE20 away, I was going to make a joke because I gave my RE20 to Bronson from Audio Hotline, who gave me the tiny mic. And I was going to say that was quite a trade, RE20 for tiny mic. But Bronson also gave me the Rode Broadcaster and the SE Dynacaster, which is on the wall back here. So we've just been sort of trading mics like Pokemon cards, and it's been super fun. So this is the Rode Broadcaster for our next question, which is from TC Connor, who asks, can you recommend a budget-friendly podcast mixer for an M3 iMac? And this goes right into kind of the last question where we talked about, upgrading things. When it comes to podcast mixers, the computer at this point doesn't really matter. If you're using, a Windows 2000 computer from the year 2000, this could be a different answer. But if you're using any M series Mac, it doesn't really matter. Any relatively new PC doesn't really matter. So we're looking at budget friendly in this case. I don't know what budget friendly means because it's different to everybody. Some people are like under $1,000 and some people are like under $100. So if you're looking for a mixer that's different than an interface, because a mixer is kind of like the Rodecaster here, you've got channels, you've got faders, you've got all that. If you're looking for something like that, I do have a couple recommendations here that I want to make sure I get correct. If you're looking for ultra cheap, the Tascam Mixcast 4 and the Zoom PodTrack P4 are really good options right now because they've been out for a while and they are on sale a lot, if not on clearance. And they're decent. I have videos on both of them. They're good. They are not the best, but you can also sometimes find them for really, really cheap. And so there's that. They're also pretty outdated at this point, especially with all the new stuff that's come out in the past several years. So if you're looking for budget friendly, really that $500 mark is where you start getting into really good things like the Mackie DLZ Creator XS, the small one, and the Rodecaster Duo, which can you see? Oh no, my Rodecaster Duo is right off screen over here. It's just the 2-channel Rodecaster Pro. Those are kind of the best options if you only need 2 microphones or less, because they work incredibly well. They sound awesome. They're fun to use. They're easy to use, and they're just good options. I really like the Mackie, but it definitely doesn't get like the updates and the support that the Rode gets. And there's that interesting relationship between Rode and Mackie now because the parent company now owns both of them. So if you're looking for something that's going to continue to get lots of updates, the Rodecaster line is the road to go down because that's going to give you more updates and support. But if the DLZ Creator does everything that you need right now, and especially if you can find it at even maybe a lower price, sometimes it goes on sale. It's phenomenal. It's such a nice little mixer. I love it a lot. So they're both pretty awesome. And those are the ones I would recommend, the Rodecaster Duo or the Mackie DLZ Creator XS. If you need more than 2 XLR channels, then you do have to jump into the 4-channel things, which is like the Rodecaster Pro 2 or something like that, which is significantly more expensive. And that's where maybe then you would want to look back at like the Tascam, the Tascam Mixcast 4, which is a little bit older, but it's a 4-channel mixer that you can probably find for around the $500 mark now, depending on where you look, or something even like the Zoom P6, which tends to be on sale a lot now. So you might be able to get some of those like 1st-generation podcast mixers at some pretty good sale prices right now if you don't have the budget to jump into something like a Rodecaster Pro 2 right away. Now you're listening to me on the Shure SM4, which is a newer microphone in Shure's lineup, which I think is Shure awesome. And that is going to bring us to our next question from Michael Trayband 9674. Can you go over how you store and back up all your footage and what drives you use to edit? Also, if you have a networking setup, can you show us? I've not made a video about this because it's definitely not my area of expertise, but we did set up a NAS system 3 years ago, and it has worked quite well overall. For editing, I actually just keep everything right on my computer. One of the upgrades I made was to get the 2 terabyte hard drive. So any projects I'm currently working on just live here because it's easier. And then when I'm done editing, I move everything to the NAS for like archive and storage and stuff. Prior to having this computer, I was just using the Samsung T7 SSDs, and those worked great to edit off of, but it's nice not to have to connect anything externally. So that's kind of my editing workflow, is whatever I'm working on just lives on my computer's hard drive. And yeah, so even after 3 years, all the applications and the files that permanently live on here are about 500 gigabytes. So I still have 1.5 free terabytes pretty much at any given time. And that can go towards my current projects that I'm working on. But yeah, for archiving, we do have a NAS system. We have the Synology G.A.S 920. And so with Synology, the number like 920, the 20 is just the year model. So ours was the 2020 model. So if there's like the 924, it'd be the 2024 model. And ours is a 4-bay NAS. So we have 4 drives in there, and each drive is 12 terabytes. If I remember this, it's been a while since I set it up. And this has worked really well just for redundancy and for archival and everything, especially if you can be on a wired network with your NAS, then you can get really fast speeds. In theory, you should also even be able to edit off of it. Ours is just in a location where it's not wired into our computers, obviously, because this computer has no wires connected to it right now. So it's not something I try to edit off of, but something I pull footage from regularly, store footage on. I usually don't store the talking head parts of my videos because that can be, an hour plus of me just sitting here talking with multiple camera angles recording, and each of those can be 50 or 60 gigabytes. Probably not something I'll ever need, but I do save like all of my B-roll and stuff that I shoot, and then that goes on there. So what that means is at times, like earlier when I was talking about AI and I needed the example of the thumbnails and stuff, I don't have to film that footage again because I know I already have it. I can just go grab it from there. And so as I've sort of continued to build this library, it really does help if I need something super obscure. If I need footage of the RE20 that I no longer own, it's on the NAS, and I can just go to the NAS for applause. I don't know. Anyway, that has worked great, and that's what we use. And I avoided getting one for so long because I'm not a networking guy, and it's not my strength, and I was really scared of it. But it turns out it wasn't terribly difficult to set up. Synology specifically has a really good, their documentation's really good. Their online support's really good. It was not crazy stressful or frustrating at all. And everything's been set up, and it's been running now for over 3 years with no problems. So that's what we use. Now you're listening to me on the Rode NT1 Signature Series in this really cool blue, and I wanted to use this microphone specifically for this next question from Capel3794. I'd love to hear more about how to position microphones to avoid mouth clicking and moisture sounds. Things like microphone distance, microphone angle, and how to match the microphone type to your mouth type, if that's even a thing. And software tools you can use to make your voice sound better. There's this entire world about how to get the best out of your microphone that's quite confusing for novices, so I'd value your straightforward advice. I really appreciate that, and it is confusing, and it's just something that takes a bit of time to learn. Let me make sure this is sounding good, because I set this up because I'm potentially going to make some errors with this microphone, but it's a good example of positioning. But if I don't have my headphones on the whole time, I could be making mistakes. So right here is kind of the example of a typical setup. The reason I use this one is because if I talk directly into it, it is very prone to plosives. That was very gentle breath coming out, but it hit that capsule. There's very little wind protection. Boom, you heard that there. So, I could put a pop filter in front of it. I could put a windscreen on top of this, or I could do what I'm doing right now and I have it angled. It's about a fist's distance from me, and it's angled at like a 45-degree angle, because this pickup pattern of this microphone is sort of everything here. So if I'm right here, it's still picking me up just fine, even though I'm not directing my voice and my breath directly into the microphone. It's picking everything up, but all those plosives and all that breath is just going straight past the capsule and not directly into it. So that's helping to reduce plosives, and it's also helping to keep the level good. I'm not too close to the microphone, but I'm not too far away where you're just hearing all the room reverb and stuff like that. So about a fist's distance is a good place to start, and about a 45-degree angle is also a good place to start. For things like moisture and mouth clicking, I am an hour into recording this. I don't know how long the edited version is going to be, but I've been talking for an hour. my mouth is feeling weird right now, and I'm also getting over a cold. So part of it really just comes down to technique. I don't personally know of any microphones that will hardware-wise eliminate mouth clicking and moisture sounds. That really does just come down to like a skill that you have to build up to be aware of. Things like, those like kind of sounds that people make, or weird clicky sounds, or it sounds like you have too much moisture in there. I definitely move my mouth and talk in a way that's a little bit different when I'm on a microphone than when I'm just talking in person, because I'm much more aware of my breath and all the weird little sounds. And it can drive you insane a little bit to think about that and always have that in your head when you're recording and stuff. But it is a skill that you build, and it does become second nature over time. So that's really important. It's just basic positioning, basic mic technique, and mic skill. It's something that takes time. Doesn't matter what microphone you're using. There are software tools, of course. A lot of software programs have something called a declicker, and what that will do is try to find any of those mouth clicky sounds and remove them. But it could also then negatively affect the quality of your audio otherwise. So experiment with it depending on the software you're using, depending on how bad the mouth clicking is, adjust the settings. There's definitely like technical routes you could go down, but at the end of the day, if it sounds good, it's good. If it works, it works. And you don't really need to worry like, should this setting be exactly in this spot? Should this slider be here or there? Like, you want to know what those things do over time, but if it sounds good, then it's totally fine. And going into the world of EQ, this is something that I've talked about a little bit and want to dive in more, but I don't want it to be overwhelming, because it is. Like you mentioned, different microphones do sound different on different voices. And I don't think there's a mouth type, but there's definitely voice types. So, something like the SM7B is a great example of a very neutral microphone. This is such a flat, like out of the box, this is sort of a boring and muddy sounding microphone. But it's really made to be EQ'd. And because it's so neutral, whether you have a deep voice or a high-pitched voice or a nasally voice, you can usually EQ this to sound pretty good on just about any voice. One reason I wasn't that into the RE20 was, for me, it had such a distinct sound that it was kind of hard to EQ the way that I want it, because its natural characteristic was really specific. The NT1 has a really specific sound. Like, certain microphones just have different sounds that work well with different voices, and it's really tricky. You can listen to me talk on different microphones all day, but if your voice doesn't sound like mine, it's going to be hard to know exactly what these are going to sound like on your voice. So some of it is a little bit trial and error. I definitely always recommend, when people order microphones, if you can make sure you get it from a place that has a good return policy. That's important, because if you get a microphone and it's just not working with your voice, you want to know that you could return it or exchange it for a different model if that works. So those kinds of things, it's more of a practical step. But not being scared to EQ is really important. It's nice when you have a microphone that sounds good the way that it is. And ideally, you want to like your microphone sound just straight out of the box. But most microphones not only sound better with a bit of EQ added, but they're kind of made for it. And that really helps you dial things in. You don't need to go super, super in-depth to start. But if you just play with like a basic EQ, low, mids, and highs, and you kind of adjust that a little bit to your voice, maybe even start with some presets. I think every audio and video editing application has presets you can start with, and you'll kind of see, if you do like a voice preset, you'll see what frequencies it boosts, what ones it takes away. If you do bass boost, treble boost, all those kind of things, you'll sort of see how it adjusts things, and then you can go from there and dial it in and just experiment until you get something that sounds good. So basic EQ is really good. A compressor is really good, because what a compressor will do is, especially for spoken word, it will take those highs and those lows and it will compress them, so that way there's not so much dynamic range between them, and basically it's not going to make it sound like someone needs to keep turning their volume up and down while they're listening to you. I have videos, I'll put a link to one here, where you can go into a parametric equalizer and eliminate unwanted frequencies and stuff like that, which is very important. And speaking of mic positioning, eliminating those unwanted frequencies is very important, but not something you necessarily have to do all the time. And a really cool thing to kind of wrap this up, this question, is if you're using the same microphone on the same voice in the same environment all the time, once you dial things in, you can just create a preset. And once you have that preset, then you can throw in your raw audio or your radio. You just add your preset, and you probably don't have to do much more after that. So it's kind of that initial building and figuring out that's tricky, but once you dial it in, it's easy to sort of have a smooth workflow after that. But don't be afraid to EQ, don't be afraid to experiment, don't be afraid to just, play around until stuff sounds the way that you like it. And if you like the way that it sounds, that means it sounds good. You're now listening to me on the Audio-Technica AT897, which is a really cool shotgun microphone that's not usually used for things like this, but I'm using it because 10 years ago, oh my God, more than 10 years ago, when I set up my very first professional podcasting studio, which was part of one of the school districts that I worked for. At the time, all we had were shotgun microphones because they were for video production, and I used these, and I thought they sounded awesome. So even though it's not the intent of this microphone, it can be a really good voice, podcasting, streaming microphone, and then it's also a good boom microphone, and it's relatively affordable, $200, $250 MSRP. I have a whole video about the AT897. I think it's super underrated. I want to make sure to include it in this video. Second to last question is from Film Your Darlings. Hi, Tom. Have you ever experienced any value from uploading long-form, wide aspect ratio content to places like Instagram or TikTok? I recently found out you could do this, on Insta at least. Haven't tried it on TikTok, and I'm wondering if it's a good idea to do. Love your show. Thanks. So, I am not an expert in social media strategy. YouTube is my main platform. That's the one that I try to figure out and try to really put a lot of thought into everything. Other social media, it's not that I don't care or don't think, but there's no strategy. I'm just like, I should post this, I should share this, do that. And you can go through my feeds and see that they can be a bit of a mess sometimes, but that's fun to be able to do that. What I would say is my thought is you want to try to make things as frictionless for the audience, for the viewer as possible. And so if people are really used to, short form vertical content that fills up their phone and they get to your thing and it's now it's really small or they have to switch their phone, rotate it around or something, that's adding friction into their experience, which some people might say, hey, that's good. That means now they're engaging and spending more time with your content. But in reality, I think a lot of people will just swipe through and not pay attention to it. So if there's any strategy to be had from my point of view, I would say embrace the format of the platform. So if you're on something like Instagram and most people are using vertical short form and that's what viewers are expecting and that's kind of what the platform is leaning towards, embrace that and do vertical short form because that's going to just make a less friction-filled experience for the viewer and maybe more people will then be able to enjoy the stuff that you make. So it is something it took a long time before I was comfortable turning a camera vertically to film some video. But once I started doing that without just trying to repurpose existing stuff, which is fun sometimes, if I do live streams, I might want to repurpose clips from there because otherwise they're just kind of gone forever. But actually filming things intentionally, not just with a phone or whatever, but even with my nicer cameras, filming them intentionally vertically and making it look really nice is something that I actually had a lot more fun with than I would expect. And editing vertical video is totally different. The way you compose things and frame things and a lot of rule of thirds stuff kind of goes out the window, or at least traditional rule of thirds stuff. And kind of going back to the AI question of you can dig your heels in and say, no, no, no. But kind of embracing this thing, being look, this is a format that a lot of people are into. It's clearly not going away. So let me experiment with it and see how I like it. And it turns out a lot of it is more enjoyable than I expected. So that might be something to consider. If there's a reason that you feel like your widescreen on vertical is the way to go, I think you can make use of that dead space. A lot of people put captions or give extra context or something. So it's not just your video in the middle and then just blankness on the top and bottom. So there's kind of cool ways you can do that. But in general, I would say my own opinion is embrace the medium and the format of a specific platform. And our last microphone of the day for the last question of the day is the Rode Procaster going into the Rodecaster Pro 2. Two different products that make me laugh every time I say them together because they sound so similar. So last question is from Hacking Hi-Fi 4247. With you being an audio and video guy, do you find yourself drawn to photography? I find my interest similar to yours, with photography being a big part of what I do in addition to the rest. If so, would be curious to see more of your work. I've always kind of balanced between audio, video, and photography. Since I started doing YouTube in 2017, video has been my primary thing because that is what I do and I just really love it. But especially prior to that, I kind of would go through phases where it's this is a year where I just, for some reason, I'm only into photos. This year I'm only into videos. And yeah, that just is always kind of been a thing. So I do really like photography. I am not a pro photographer by any means. I don't know that I really have like work. But I can say like our house, maybe not in here with this kind of artwork, but throughout the rest of our house, all the photos that are on the walls are photos I've taken, which is kind of cool. I think I've shared stuff on Instagram over the years, and I just do stuff for fun. Photography is a really cool thing to like take some photos, edit them, print them out sometimes. They don't necessarily need to be shared anywhere. And it is a cool skill to have sometimes, like, my rec league hockey team being able to take a really cool team photo, or being able to take portraits of people who, never have those taken of them before or something is really cool. It's a nice skill set to just sort of have in the back pocket. I love taking photos, and I actually like editing photos, but I hate the photo editing workflow. Like, once I take photos and I have hundreds of photos, they usually just sort of sit on the memory card for like a while, because I just don't want to go through and like cull them and go. I just like, for some reason, I really hate that part of the process. And so that kind of probably keeps me away from it. And then eventually I go through and I edit, and that's usually fun. Once I find some photos I like and I play with and I edit, then it gets really, really fun. But that is not nearly as often as I like taking the photos, getting the camera, getting the lenses, taking photos. Absolutely love that. The rest of the workflow is definitely like, I guess I just like video editing more. But I really do like photography, even though videography is the main thing that I do. Photo is just like a really fun, I don't know, side hobby, I guess. Hobby to a hobby, if you could have that. Tertiary hobby. That's a fun word, tertiary. So thank you very much to everyone who submitted questions for today for this first Q&A video, which ended up being significantly longer than I expected. If you did make it this far to the end, I very much appreciate you. Very much appreciate everyone who submitted questions. If I didn't get to include your question in this, I did try to reply to the thing. So if I put like a heart on it and didn't reply, that's because I was planning to include it. If I didn't get to include it in here, I tried to reply to the post online. So hopefully that was fun and enjoyable, and I appreciate the support. And again, if you're this far into this video, I will let you know that I did recently kind of shift up my memberships and things. I actually shut down and moved everything away from Patreon, which I've been using for a long time, YouTube channel memberships and Patreon. I shifted everything entirely to YouTube. So thank you to everyone who helped support my channel through YouTube channel memberships. And if you want to do that too, you can check out the 3 tiers, which should be simplified and a little easier to understand there. And well, I don't even know what video to recommend at the end of this, so I'm going to let the algorithm do it. If you want to keep hanging out with me, the algorithm says you should do it with this video right here.